Thank you, ma'am, for that warm and kind introduction. So before I begin my lecture, I would like to thank, of course, Yusek Mercy. He used to be the undersecretary of the NEDA at the time, and she was very helpful to our department. Of course, Dean Rico, and of course, a while ago, Chancellor Sani Camacho. So I understand that you are all here at UPLB. You came from different countries. I heard that some of you were from China, from Korea, and from what else?
Mongolia,
Mongolia.
Vietnam.
Yeah. So
Vietnam.
these places are very good places. I've been in these places, especially in, of course, Korea and Mongolia. Okay. So again, I am Attorney Jonas Leones. I handle the policy planning, international affairs of the department. I also handle the rehabilitation of Manila Bay and Boracay. So most of my presentation will be discussing how we undertake the rehabilitation of this vital ecosystem. So I hope I can provide you some information on these things. Again, I would like to say a pleasant good morning to our distinguished faculty, our participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to join you at the International Ecology School 2026. Today, we would like to share the Philippine experience in translating ecological evidence in environmental governance. Across different environmental challenges, from coastal rehabilitation and waste management to forest restoration and responsible mineral development, we have learned that science creates its greatest impact when it informs policies, management decisions, and practical actions. Ecology helps us understand how ecosystems function and how they respond to environmental change. But an equally important question is, what happens after the science? Does it remain in journals, technical reports, or does it influence how governments make decisions? Today, environmental issues are becoming increasingly complex. Governments must make decisions despite uncertainty, competing priorities, and emerging risks. In that context, ecological research becomes essential, not only to understand environmental problems, but to provide the evidence needed for effective governance. To frame today's discussion, let me borrow Barry Commoner's 4 laws of ecology. These principles remind us that ecosystems are interconnected, that waste never truly disappears, that natural systems provide the best guide for restoration, and that every development decisions involve environmental trade-offs. As we go through the Philippine case studies, each one will illustrate one of these ecological principles and how it has shaped environmental governance. Our first example is Boracay Island. All of you perhaps have visited this beaches in Boracay. This is one of the Philippines' most recognized tourism destination and an important contributor to the country's economy. By 2018, years of rapid tourism growth have placed significant pressure on the island's ecosystem. Scientific assessment found declining water quality, coral reef degradation, overloaded wastewater infrastructure, and tourism levels that had exceeded the island's carrying capacity. The important lesson was that these were interconnected environmental issues, demonstrating that the effective rehabilitation required managing the entire ecosystem rather than addressing individual problems independently. Understanding the problem was only the first step. The next challenge was translating ecological evidence into government action. Carrying capacity assessments, long-term water quality monitoring, wetland assessments, geohazard investigations provided the basis for rehabilitation. The evidence supported the creation of the Boracay Interagency Task Force under Executive Order Number 53 issued by then President Aquino, bringing together national agencies under a coordinated, science-based rehabilitation program. Rather than relying on isolated interventions, rehabilitation priorities were guided by ecological evidence, ensuring that environmental management addressed the underlying causes of degradation. The image on the left shows that visitor management became science-based. The carrying capacity assessment established the number of visitors the islands could sustainably accommodate, allowing tourism to be managed within environmental limits rather than market demand alone. These results demonstrate that rehabilitation was not measured simply by reopening the island, but by measurable improvements in ecosystems health. The Boracay experience reflects Barry Commoner's first law that says everything is connected to everything else. Environmental degradation resulted from multiple interconnected pressures, so rehabilitation also required an integrated response. More importantly, the lessons from Boracay were institutionalized. Through issuance of the department, the carrying capacity methodology is now applied to other sustainable tourism destinations, while environmental permitting on the island now incorporates carrying capacity and community environmental impacts. The same principle is evident on a much larger scale in the rehabilitation of Manila Bay. Unlike Boracay, Manila Bay is a vast coastal ecosystem shared by multiple cities, industries, river systems, and millions of people. Over many decades, untreated domestic wastewater, solid waste, and rapid urbanization severely degraded water quality. Fecal coliform concentration reached millions to billions of per most probable number per 100 millimeters. That is far exceeding the standard for recreational waters. Scientific assessments show that population did not originate from a single source. It is accumulated throughout the watershed, demonstrating that restoring Manila Bay required managing the entire ecosystem rather than simply cleaning the shoreline. The scale of the challenge becomes clearer from the figures on this slide. Only about 1/4 of the population within the watershed was connected to sewerage systems, while less than 10% had access to sanitation services. Metro Manila also generated 65,000 metric tons of solid waste every day, with only about 57% being properly managed. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of informal settlers' families lived along waterways with limited sanitation services. Together, these conditions explain why pollution continued to flow into Manila Bay and why rehabilitation required coordinated actions across the entire watershed. Scientific evidence provided the foundation for rehabilitation, but it also needed to be translated into coordinated action. Through Administrative Order Number 16, Series of 2019, the government established the Manila Bay Task Force to coordinate rehabilitation efforts among national agencies and local government units. This was supported by continuous water quality monitoring, hydrographic studies, sediment assessment, habitat studies, and geohazard assessments. These scientific assessments help prioritize interventions and provided the evidence needed to guide our rehabilitation. As shown in the graphs, fecal coliform concentrations generally declined from 2019 to 2024, indicating gradual improvements in water quality despite normal seasonal variations. These improvements were supported by concrete interventions. Between 2022 and 2024, more than 218,000 tons of solid waste and water hyacinths were removed from Manila Bay and its tributaries, while mangrove rehabilitation, easement delineation, and expanded wastewater treatment further strengthened ecosystems recovery. These results demonstrate the importance of long-term monitoring, not only to identify environmental problems, but also to measure whether government interventions are producing the intended outcomes. The Manila Bay experience again illustrates Barry Commoner's first law, that everything is connected to everything else. The rehabilitation succeeded because it addressed pollution at its source, across rivers, communities, industries, and the entire watershed, and not simply along the coastline. Next slide. Plastic pollution is often associated with polluted beaches and rivers. However, ecological research tells a different story. The Philippines, as mentioned a while ago, generates about 61 metric tons of solid waste every day. About 6 tonner trucks perhaps. With plastics accounting for 12 to 24% of the waste stream. Much of this plastic moves through terrestrial ecosystem before eventually reaching rivers and the ocean. These findings shifted the focus of governance from managing waste after disposal to preventing waste from becoming pollution in the first place. This shift is reflected in the Extended Producer Responsibility Act of 2022. Rather than placing responsibility solely on consumers and local governments, this law, the Extended Producer Responsibility, requires producers to recover increasing amounts of their plastic packaging from 20% in 2023 up to 80% by 2028. More importantly, it promotes product design, reuse, recycling, and resource recovery, supporting the country's transition towards a circular economy. In other words, ecological evidence expanded waste governance beyond collection and disposal, to include the entire life cycle of the product. This brings us to Barry Commoner's second law, that says everything must go somewhere. Waste does not disappear after it is discarded. It moves through ecosystem unless we intervene. That is why the circular economy illustrated on this slide is so important. Instead of the traditional take, make, dispose model, it gives material in productive use through better design, reuse, recycling, and recovery. The goal of environmental governance is no longer simply collect waste, but to prevent this waste from becoming pollution. Our fourth example focuses on forest rehabilitation. For many years, success was often measured by the number of trees planted. However, ecological research has shown that restoring a forest is about much more than increasing tree cover. As shown on this slide, the Philippines has lost a significant portion of its forest cover over the past century. This highlighted the need to restore not only forests, but also the ecological functions they provide. Research on ecological succession, native species, ecosystem services, the landscape ecology shifted the focus towards restoring healthy, resilient ecosystems rather than simply planting more trees. This shift in scientific understanding was reflected in forestry policy. Government strengthened the protection of the remaining natural forests through the logging moratorium under Executive Order Number 23, issued by our President, while the Philippine Master Plan for Climate Resilient Forestry Development integrated climate resilience into long-term forest management. More recently, sustainable forest management agreements have provided a framework for balancing forest protection with the responsible use of forest resources. Together, these reforms demonstrate how ecological evidence reshape forest governance. Scientific evidence also transformed the way forests are managed. The Lawin Forest and Biodiversity Protection System introduced geospatial technologies and digital monitoring to strengthen forest protection and enforcement. At the same time, the enhanced national greening program shifted from simply increasing tree cover toward ecosystem restoration, biodiversity conservation, and climate resilience. Emerging initiatives such as forest carbon credits, credit projects further demonstrate how science continues to guide innovative approaches to forest management. These developments reflect Barry Commoner's third law, which says that nature knows best. The lesson from forest rehabilitation is the successful restoration measured not by the number of trees planted, but by the recovery of functioning ecosystems. By working with natural ecological processes through approaches such as forest landscape restoration, assisted natural regeneration, and nature-based solutions, government can achieve more resilient and sustainable environmental incomes. The global transition to clean energy has significantly increased the demand for critical minerals including nickel, cobalt, copper, and bromide. These minerals are essential for renewable energy technologies, but many are found in environmentally sensitive and biodiversity-rich areas. This creates a fundamental governance challenge. How do we support the clean energy transition while at the same time protecting ecosystems and biodiversity? Biodiversity assessments, environmental baseline studies, and ecological risk assessment provides the scientific basis for managing these trade-offs and supporting more informed development decisions. Responding to this challenge requires more than environmental assessment. It also requires a governance framework that evolves with emerging priorities. In the Philippines, the mining regulatory framework has gradually strengthened environmental safeguards while recognizing the growing importance of critical minerals for the clean energy transition. Policies such as DNR Administrative Order Number 2022-04 on biodiversity protection in mining operations demonstrate how ecological evidence has been translated into regulatory requirements. These measures help ensure that mineral development is guided not only by economic opportunity, but also by sound ecological evidence. Our final case reflects Barry Commoner's fourth law, which says there is no such thing as a free lunch. The photographs on this slide remind us that every development decision has environmental consequences. The role of science is not to eliminate these trade-offs, but to help governments understand environmental risk, evaluate alternatives, and implement appropriate safeguards and rehabilitation measures. In this way, ecological evidence enables development to proceed more responsibly while protecting biodiversity and ecosystem integrity. Looking across all 5 case studies, a common pattern emerges. Environmental governance begins with ecological observation supported by long-term monitoring and scientific research. That evidence is translated into decision support tools, which informs policies, plans, and programs. Through monitoring and adaptive management, governments continue to evaluate outcomes and refine their decision as new evidence becomes available. This continuum demonstrates that science and governance are not separate processes. They continuously strengthen one another. Let me leave you with these two key messages. First, environmental governance is not a linear process. Effective policies must continue to evolve as ecosystem changes and new scientific evidence becomes available. Number 2, ecological research has its greatest public value when it is translated into practical action. Ultimately, our goal is to move from insights to impacts. Allow me to end with my final reflection. Whether your work focuses on ecology, environmental science, engineering, planning, or public policy, each of you contributes to the same continuum we have discussed today. Wherever it lies along the continuum, the true value of ecological research is measured not only by what it discovers, but by how it helps society make better decisions for people, nature, and future generations. Thank you very much, and I wish everyone a productive day.
Thank you very much, Yusek Leones. 3 things, 3 takeaways.